Hello, my name is Edmund DeMarsh. I'm the editor of the Trends Journal. Today, it's a great privilege to introduce you to my guest, Scott Horton. He is the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com. He's the host of the popular podcast, Scott Horton Show, where he conducted more than 6,000 interviews since 2003. He's the co-host of Provoked with Daryl Cooper. He's also a very respected author, and he wrote books called Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. He's also the author of Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the author of Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. Scott, thank you for joining the Trends Journal today.
Thank you so much for having me. Good to be with you.
I just watched your interview with Lex Friedman. I promise this isn't going to be over 10 hours.
Okay. I'll take it easy on you.
You posted today something I'd like to get into right off the bat. You mentioned how Netanyahu came out yesterday and he said, MAGA is Israel first. You're not MAGA unless you're Israel first. So I know his position on it. I know why he would say such a thing. He would tell people that Israel is utterly important for the U.S. survival and interest in the region. When Israel fights terrorists and fights its adversaries in the region, it's doing so in part on behalf of the United States. People in the government who support Israel would say the same thing. That's basically the argument. And it's also important that the U.S. maintains a relationship with Israel just so it keeps its influence in the region, so other outside actors like Russia and China don't get any kind of a strong foothold there. How long will Netanyahu and his supporters in Congress and in the government be able to make that case? And are they losing the argument right now?
It's funny. The only part of that really sounded credible to me was like the threat that Israel would go and ally with one of the other major powers against us if we don't do whatever they say. You know, that sounds like the kind of thing that they would do. But I mean, quite frankly, I think the Russians or the Chinese can have them if they want them. They think it's in their best interest to tie this millstone around their neck. But no, of course, it's always been in the Israelis' interest and in the Israel lobby and America's interest to conflate all their enemies with ours, when, of course, they're the reason that some of these enemies in the Middle East are our enemies in the first place. But then what they really want to do, right, is, as they succeeded in doing for so much of the century so far, is just conflating all Muslims together and all Arabs together so that our enemies seem like they're the same thing as Israel's enemies, so that it's easier for the Israelis to get away with stealing the rest of Palestine and creating a greater Israel. And, getting rid of Saddam Hussein, overthrowing Bashar al-Assad, overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi, even dividing South Sudan from Sudan and attacking Somalia. These were all on the Israelis' hit list for America to do for them. And, it's really a sin. It bothers me a lot that to this day, I hear so many people say, soldiers from the wars, characters in movies even, and whatever. This is the cliche about Iraq War II is, I don't even know why I was there. I don't even know what the war was about. It's a mystery why we even did this. Maybe it's because George Bush just was afraid or, wanted to impress his father, or was angry that he had been told falsely that Saddam Hussein had tried to kill his father with a truck bomb in an assassination attempt in 1993. Or maybe it's just about, Houston wants that oil. But no, it was the neoconservatives who did it, and they did it for Israel. They had this ridiculous plan to make the new Iraq essentially loyal to Israeli goals, that they would somehow control the Shiites, the Shiite clergy of Iraq, and they would, one, force Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran and start being friends with Israel. And then two, lord it over the Iranians and somehow pressure them to make regime change and make nice with Israel there. And at the same time, build a pipeline to Haifa so that they can save a nickel on a barrel of oil at the expense of trillions of dollars of American treasure, 4,500 of our guys' lives, and many more if you count the contractors and all the wounded, tens of thousands wounded, and then 1 million dead Iraqis, a massive civil war, a whole new generation of bin Ladenite fighters, and then the blowback that spread on into Syria with the help of Barack Obama, and all of the consequences of that was for some harebrained scheme by a bunch of American Israel firsters, the neoconservatives, serving and not even serving the then serving prime minister's interest, Ariel Sharon, as much as his inter-party rival, Benjamin Netanyahu, who was then the former and soon to be again, well, relatively soon to be again prime minister of Israel at that time. Sharon hated Iran more, but it was Netanyahu that always wanted us to go after Iraq. And remember, he testified before the Congress. I guarantee you that if you do this, the reverberations, the positive reverberations will spread throughout the region. Well, that was what he had in mind. It was what David Wormser called the clean break. So people are still upset that we wasted 20 years waging a no-win war on why do we do that anyway for 20 years? We did it for Israel. And now they're saying, no, you can't be MAGA. You can't be America first without being Israel instead. I would say to you that no, in fact, Zionism is the giant Achilles heel in the entire Make America Great Again program. You can be defend America first or Israel instead. And you can't have it both ways. And more, the American right is waking up to that fact. I mean, these people promised you the rapture if you just support the war in Iraq 20 years ago. And aren't you tired of being lied to and used and manipulated? You know, Benjamin Netanyahu said on a secret recording, you can find it easily on YouTube. He didn't know he was being filmed. He said 80% of Americans support us. It's absurd. Let me tell you about the Americans, okay? America's a thing that is easily moved. Right? They don't care about us. They only care that we care about them. And I'm talking about the Israeli government. I'm not condemning their entire society here. I'm talking about the state.
Scott, it seems like the more Americans, at least the population, comes out in support of Palestinians and abandon to a degree Israel, it seems like the politicians, they double down on their support. So like Noam just today, Christy Noam, took a photo with one of the Israeli ambassadors and it talked about, you know, the relationship and how important it is. She was at the border. How do you see this unfolding as far as just politics go in the US? Because I feel like at a certain point, I don't see Republicans moving I think they'll stay devoted fully to Israel. But the Democrats, I think it'll be up to them. Do you think that this is a reasonable analysis? Democrats are going to have to do some soul searching in where they want to go, because we just saw Jake Sullivan come out during an interview and he said, well, if I was in Congress, I would support a weapons halt. I would stop selling weapons to Israel. Now, that's a far cry from his position when he was under Biden. But is that something, are we seeing something of an evolution among Democrats that they're going to have to come to terms with and where they go forward? And do you think MAGA Republicans will just keep doubling down on their support for Israel?
Well, I mean, this is the news, right? This is a massive crisis in both political parties right now, right? Where especially inside the Democratic Party, where I think Jake Sullivan's little signal there is essentially meaningless. No, I think the strict answer to your question is the Democratic Party, they're not going to change at all. The Democratic voters have already changed by tens and tens and tens of percents of massive swings. I'm not sure exactly, but like 30, 50 point swings, something like that. It's super duper majority, 75, 3/4 type percents on the Democratic side among voters, among people who identify themselves as Democrats or with the Democratic Party or as progressives or liberals of whatever stripe, right? People who would vote Democrat. They are so against it, but they are up against a party leadership that will not budge 1 inch, which just makes the contrast so stark. And so, Jake Sullivan can drop them a few crumbs like that, but that doesn't signify any real change. And so you're going to have more and more a real controversy on the Democratic side over this. And also then on the right, I think don't underestimate the same phenomenon that's going on right now. The recent polls say that it's a majority of Americans sympathize more with the Palestinians now. And it's 50-50 among Republicans. 50-50. And I don't know what the numbers were if we went back 3 years ago, okay? But it was nothing like that, right? I bet you it was 80-20 or something in favor of Israel. Is now 50-50. And you have so many conservative leaders who are just absolutely sick of this and they just won't tolerate it. And it's not because of who the Israelis are. It's because of what they are doing to these poor people. And, it's also, it's the same thing. And this is what always gets me the most. And I think it also bothers other people. It's the constant lies. It's the lies about everything. It's this massive Hasbara program, they call it, which I guess means explaining in Hebrew, but it means like public relations, pro-Israeli state public relations. And they just lie from morning to night about everything and then falsely accuse anybody who knows better of being a vicious, racist, anti-Semite, Hitlerian, or whatever. And it's just ridiculous now. Nobody wants to put up with it anymore. And the fact of the matter is, the biggest lie that they would have Americans believe, that's heavily implied all the time, is that Palestine is a nation, that this is the country next door that attacked them, and now they are attacking back somehow, defending themselves. But no, Palestine, Gaza, and the West Bank, these are Indian reservations. These people are already conquered. And you can see the white in my beard. Since 9 years before I was born, in 1967, they were completely conquered. They'd been under the rule of the Egyptians and the Jordanians before that. Not that they were free before that, but they've been under Israeli rule ever since then. So this is not a matter of like Ben Shapiro has to lie and say, well, what would we do if Mexico was attacking us across the Rio Grande? Well, Mexico means the national government in Mexico City and its professional armed military force. That's what Mexico means when you say that. But that's not what we're talking about. That analogy is inapt, and people are sick and tired of being lied to. This is essentially a canned hunt. The closest analogy from, near our era is probably the Warsaw Ghetto, where the actual Hitlerians rounded up the Jews in World War II before they finally moved in to exterminate them all. And it is that level of savagery. People want to deny it just because of the cognitive dissonance, not because of any set of facts that they can rely on, but just because it doesn't make sense that we would be backing the National Socialists in this one. But yeah, we are. And it's wrong. And just more and more people every day are snapping out of it. I have to say one last thing and I'll stop is I had to quit Twitter. So I've been working on these other projects for a while now. And I can't spend all day on that thing. I can only abuse it. I can't just use it. So I had to quit, but I also had to go on there to promote that Lex Friedman interview that I did. So I was just on there for a couple of minutes. And man, I saw people getting exploded to death who were clearly civilian rescue workers trying to save somebody else who'd already been completely maimed beyond belief, right? And they get killed. And then I paged down a little bit more, and it's a father pulling his son out of the rubble who's completely a mess and clearly dead. And the grief on his face, he's just dying. He's gonna die soon. And I got to see this just. And I can't tell, when I was a kid, did you ever see this when you were a kid in the 90s at or I don't know how old you are, but it was like a bootleg videotape that went around called Faces of Death.
Yes.
It was like, oh, they found a body, dude.
Yes.
And it was a hardcore thing because we never saw a dead body. We never saw even a picture of a dead body. Hollywood movies, fake dead bodies only. We never saw what it was like to see a dead human person. And it was like a big deal. And I remember some of my friends watched Face of Death 2 and 3 and 4.
Because they had versions of it, right?
Yeah,
It wasn't just one video. It was
but I had my fill after one, I get it. Okay. And you know what, too? I bet I grew up a little bit right then. You know what I mean? I probably saw that when I was 16, 17. Okay, that's a little bit of reality check of what it really means to be a mammal in this world. You know what I mean? It's going to happen to you too one day or whatever. Dude, I got to see Faces of Death, 1001 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 every single day on social media of what the Israelis are doing to these poor, helpless, unarmed people, right? I mean, they're just savaging them, killing little kids, killing women. They deliberately target pregnant women and little toddlers. There's no denying it at all. They call them grasshoppers, right? So they're not even goats or pigs or some kind of livestock like that. They're insects to be eradicated. And you see how it's just a turn of phrase. It's just like saying about the Vietnamese, they're the goops, so now we can kill them. Well, that's what they do. They go, well, they're the goyim. They're grasshoppers. So compared to us, that means we have these kind of rights that they don't have, and so we can take their lives away from them. That's all it means. It's the same reason that it's the reason for the N-word, right? It's to deny people their humanity so that you can kill them. That's what those words are for, and that's how they talk about these people, and that's how they treat them, including their children.
After the Hamas attack on October 7, 2023, everyone knew Israel was going to defend itself and attack Hamas. Are you at all surprised of the extent of it, where we are today? And part two of that question is, would it be any different right now if Biden was in office instead of Trump? Because Trump was the guy that Netanyahu's Knesset wanted. The extremists in Israel love Trump because of his devotion. You see everyone that he's picked on his cabinet is fully committed and devoted. It's almost like a Miriam Adelson handpicked his cabinet for him. If someone was a conspiracy theorist, they would think that. What do you see? Are you, as an expert on the region, are you surprised where we are still to this day, and it's still unfolding? You mentioned the photos that are shown every day on social media. There's no outcry, no international real movement. Are you surprised by that personally?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of people who are very upset about it and wish very much that they could do something about it. There's, legions of new media people who are rising up just over this. They just can't stand this. And so their shows, focus at least in part on this. It's happening all over the world. There are, protest movements. But as far as political control, the people just don't have it. These are the same people who go to the ends of the earth to blow people up in the name of democracy. But, slight deviation onto Ukraine, where we've had 80 something and 90 something % of the people in Europe and the United States have wanted a negotiated solution to the Ukraine war for the last 2 years or 3 years at least, and at least 2 years. And they don't care about that at all. What do you mean 80 something % of the population of our country, of the EU, want a negotiated settlement? So what? It means absolutely nothing to them. You know what I mean? I don't believe in the will of the people in any sense, especially if it means trying to stop them from doing what they want. They just go right ahead. And so when it comes to the United States of America, of course, America is the world's policeman. That means the law doesn't apply to us, just like the policeman in your town. They can run red lights and even shoot a guy in the back and say, well, he's reaching for his waistband, do whatever they want. And so it's the same thing with the USA. And if America deputizes Israel and says that they now have a license to kill and they can do whatever they want and they can violate any international law, then in fact they can, right? They may not, but they can, and we'll help them do it. And you're right too, that the Likud preferred Donald Trump, but I honestly couldn't tell you why. Joe Biden did everything that they said. The Trump people made the biggest deal about the fact that Joe Biden held up delivery of 2,000-pound bombs for like 1 day before he turned around and gave in. And the Trump people raised millions of dollars on that. Joe Biden is a vicious anti-Semite. He wants to help Hamas destroy Israel. Like, are you kidding me? This is the most Zionist senator in the history of Zionist senators. But Donald Trump goes, oh yeah, watch this. I'll make him pale in comparison. You want to, you want me to recognize your seizure of the Golan Heights? Fine. You want to move the embassy to Jerusalem? Here's why that's important, by the way. If you move the embassy to Jerusalem, that means America agrees with and recognizes Israel's claim that all of Jerusalem, east and west, is the unified, undivided, eternal capital of Israel, meaning that it cannot be in its eastern half the capital of a Palestinian state, which was always the plan before, right? And so it was preventing for all time a Palestinian state with its capital being based in East Jerusalem. That was the purpose of moving the embassy there. Say America agrees with Israel about that. They will never let a Palestinian state have its capital in East Jerusalem. And all the rest, bribing all the countries in the Middle East to sign on to the Abraham Accords and whatever. Netanyahu says jump and Donald Trump says how high. And it's always been, I have to say, just so people don't misunderstand me, although it may be too late, maybe they already clicked away, but I hate the Democrats more than any of y'all. And I only want to see them suffer. I'm actually very childish about it. I want, like, for example, on the Russiagate thing, I hope that the Justice Department just ruthlessly persecutes John Brennan and Jim Comey and Hillary Clinton and every single one of their co-conspirators, all the way down to, I don't know, I guess you can't probably persecute Rachel Maddow, but I despise these people. They might as well have burned Waco yesterday.
Scott, I have a quick...
So I'm not arguing from that side, from some left-wing side. I relish Donald Trump's victories over his enemies, who I detest even more than he does. It's just that this thing about him, it's not right. It's just not. And people know in their heart that this is not right. Even if some hippie agrees with you, still, this is not what we're supposed to be doing.
Scott, I watched an interview with John Mearsheimer yesterday. He was on with Judge Napolitano. and he spoke about how his theory is that Russiagate got Trump to give Ukraine offensive weapons. And it's because Ukraine had these offensive weapons that they were able to at least initially stand up to Russia, or were more prepared for an engagement with Russia. So I was watching that and I was wondering, how much does Russiagate play a role in the Ukraine war even starting?
Oh, so much.
So no one's even talking,
Yes.
they're not even talking about that in the media. That's something that's not really discussed, that Russiagate is beyond just a political issue. It created potentially what we're seeing right now play out in Ukraine. It might never have happened, the war, without
Absolutely.
Russiagate.
Absolutely right. And look, why won't they reckon with that? Because then they have to admit that they were wrong the whole time, that they bought a total lie and regurgitated it for all of us for 3 years straight. And I'm sure your audience already knows this. I don't mean to be patronizing and talk down to people or whatever, because I want to believe that everybody already knows this. But then again, I keep being confronted with evidence that people still don't understand this. That whole thing was fake. All of it. That whole thing about where there's smoke, there's fire, that wasn't smoke. It was steam. It was hot air. It was just propaganda. And the ringleader of it all was John Brennan, the director of the CIA. He's the one who started it before Hillary Clinton and her team even got on board for the thing. And he's the same guy who was the leader of Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria, the al-Qaeda suicide bombers who now rule the country, thanks to him, in part. And he's the same guy who started the war in Ukraine, when after the coup d'etat, he went to, you could call it a street putsch if you want, the American engineered overthrow of the government there in 2014. He's the one who went to Kiev on April the 12th and 13th. And you can read about that in USA Today and in Forbes.
This is Brennan, right?
Brennan. And they started the war the next day. They launched their civil war, their anti-terrorist operation against the people of the East the next day on his orders. And we know now from much later reporting that the CIA moved right in and ran the war from the very beginning, built 12 bases inside Donetsk, that like secret underground bases all over the place, a dozen of them, or 14 even, according to the New York Times. So he was the leader of the neo-Nazi militias who, initiated that war against the people in East Ukraine. The same guy who led the bin Ladenites in Syria. This is the same guy who framed Trump in Russiagate. And every single bit of it that they said, all of those little strands, honestly, it's the same thing they did to Saddam Hussein, right? You just make up 100 allegations, 150. And then people just think, God, there's got to be something to this. I mean, the CIA says, the FBI says, were they going to lie to me? As Willie Nelson said, going to lie to me on my own damn TV? No way, do they? They don't disrespect me that much, do they? I couldn't believe it. And so instead, in fact, think how they turn it around. If you don't believe in Russiagate, well, then you're the kook. Because what are you saying? That the CIA and the FBI and the Democrats and the media all ganged up against the democratically elected president of the United States of America to frame him for treason with the Kremlin in Moscow? Come on. That's crazy, right? But nope, that was what was real. And all of the accusations against Trump and his men were false. And I have 75 pages devoted to this in my book, Provoked. And I'm happy to announce, even though it kills me, that the great Aaron Maté, who's so much better than me, is about to publish a book all about exactly your point. So my book, Provoked, goes all the way back to Bush Sr. and has everything Bill Clinton and W. Bush ever did wrong and all these things. Aaron's book is, first of all, by the way, for people who don't know, Aaron Maté from the Gray Zone and Real Clear Investigations. He is a brilliant original Russiagate investigative reporter, right? He broke stories on this stuff. He's not like me doing 99%, secondhand work of other people's journalism stuff. He broke stories on this stuff. Excellent analysis the whole time and everything. So he's now writing a book about Russiagate and the role that Russiagate played in the launching of the Ukraine war. So I haven't had a chance to read his book yet. I believe it's now scheduled to come out in October or November. I know you can pre-order it on Amazon.com. And if everybody knows Aaron Maté and he's a brilliant genius, the book is bound to be absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to read it. I know it'll be better than my take on these things for sure. But point is that, yes, you're 100% right, that there was all this pressure on Trump to prove what a Russian agent he wasn't. And, I swore I had a footnote like this and I just could not find it anywhere. The only direct quote I have like this was his son talking about Syria and saying, look, we bombed Assad in Syria and we wouldn't do that. Oh, no, I'm wrong. Well, I have that, but no, I do have a quote. I do have a quote from, I believe, Trump himself. I'm sorry, my mind's eye is a little fuzzy right now, but I do believe I do have a quote in there from Trump himself, along the lines of saying that this proves that he's not a Russian agent, right? Or this, he says, they'll criticize me if I don't do this. So that's why I have to do this, is I'll look weak on the Russia issue, this kind of thing. So I have a quote from his son on the Syria angle. Why would we bomb Russia's friend Assad if we were Russian agents? And then there's a quote like that from Trump himself, talking about, this played into his political calculation here, that there was this constant accusation against him. So he's going to help make up for that by pouring these weapons in. And then here's the other thing. And I really don't know the extent of Trump's involvement in this. Quite honestly, he may not have known about this. His entire government, his own National Security Council, and everybody that worked for him on this issue worked against him in his first term. So if a good reporter asked Trump about this and he denied knowing anything about it, I think I'd probably believe him, quite honestly. I don't know. I have no information that he knows about this or ordered it. On the other hand, it was still his responsibility. But anyway, what I'm talking about is this. In 2019, the German foreign minister, a guy named Steinmeier, proposed basically like a new order of operations for implementing the previous Minsk II deal. And it was supposed to be a compromise between the Russian and Ukrainian interpretations of the thing in the order in which the deal's implemented. And the ambassador, William Taylor, leaned on the brand new President Zelensky, who ran on peace and compromise, and leaned on him and told him not to sign it. It's the same thing that Ambassador William Zimmerman did back in 1993, to ruin the Lisbon deal that could have prevented the war in Bosnia. And it's the same thing, the same kind of malpractice. They leaned on him to not sign it. And at the same time, there were a bunch of neo-Nazis who were also holding these giant rallies across the country called No to Capitulation, where they were threatening to murder him if he would dare to compromise with the Russians then. And so instead of Donald Trump, look, let's do the counterfactual, okay? Let's just say Donald Trump was inaugurated and he was treated as legitimate by the entire American political establishment and the media as the guy who won the election. He did run on getting along with Russia, and apparently the American people approved of that policy. So now he's pursuing that objective, and he has the right to, and it's fine. And just pretend for a moment that that had been the atmosphere that he was operating in, right? It's virtually certain then he would have been able to implement Minsk II. He would have been able to end the Civil War years before it turned into the Russian actual invasion with regular troops that began only in the beginning of 2022. They could have solved the deal, and they could have moved forward on cooperation on as many things as possible and short-circuited the Cold War, prevented the new Cold War. And instead, he was so bogged down with these false accusations of treason that he was essentially forced to be a de facto Barack Obama, a de facto Joe Biden for 4 years, holding their place, keeping their seat warm, instead of having the opportunity to turn it around. And I'll end on this. And again, I have 75 pages on this in Provoked. If you want to see me make my case, I'll make my case in there. But I'll tell you right now.
And Provoked, you're referring to your book.
Right, my book. I have a show called that too.
Just so the people watching understand,
right.
You're referring to your book here.
Yeah. In my book, Provoked. And I quote in there from a CNN article where the FBI, right at the time where they were deciding that, well, we don't have what we need from the cabinet to overthrow Donald Trump under the 25th Amendment, which is supposed to be used in case the president's like Joe Biden, right? He's had a stroke or he's got dementia or whatever, and he's not fit to fulfill his duties. That's what the 25th Amendment is for. They created it after Woodrow Wilson because his wife ran his government after his stroke. And they said, no, the cabinet should be able to say in an emergency if a president is incapacitated. So anyway, they wanted to use that to do a coup against Donald Trump. What else do you call it? To do a coup against him based on 100% lies in March of 2017. And then when they realized they couldn't do that, then they told CNN, they said, well, we'll launch this special counsel investigation against him. Because at least if we can't overthrow him through the 25th Amendment, at least we'll be able to rein him in and prevent him from changing our Russia policy, first and foremost. And then also reflect for just one moment. Sorry, I know I promised that was going to be the last thing I was going to say on this, but I thought of one more important thing. If you go back, fast forward a bit, because he was finally acquitted of all of this nonsense in the spring of 2019. Well, then by the end of 2019, they're already bringing up the Russiagate. The Ukraine gate scam and his impeachment. They literally impeached the president of the United States for the third time in American history over the accusation that he temporarily held up an arms deal to Ukraine. I swear to God, that's the true history of the United States of America forever. And no backseas, right? Like you can't erase that. That was he was literally impeached by the House of Representatives for that. And what was the testimony from his enemies at the time and the people who had turned him in for his supposed crime? It was a lieutenant colonel on the National Security Council, Alexander Vindman, who was a dual citizen born in Ukraine, who testified before the House and wrote a long article about this for the Atlantic or the New Republic, I forget, I think the Atlantic. And he testified, said the same thing over and over again. Donald Trump was trying to change America's foreign policy, and he had no right to do that. It wasn't anything that he had said, particularly to Zelensky, that amounted to blackmail in that perfect phone call, so-called. There was no extortion in that phone call. There's no blackmail in that phone call. There's nothing impeachable in that phone call, other than, as Vindman explained, the United States of America has a Russia policy and a Ukraine policy. Trump is not allowed to change it. It doesn't matter that he's the only man in the entire executive branch who stood for election, the only one out of all of them. And he was elected in a general election across the United States of America. And duly so. And he's the only man who gets to sit in that chair behind that desk and call those shots. And no, he is overruled by what Vindman called the interagency. The interagency. We have a Russia policy. We have a Ukraine policy. And who the hell does this guy, President Trump, think he is to change it? No way. And then he talked with all of his supervisors who told him, yes, you're right. Let's all be insubordinate and let's ignore the president's instructions to us because we know better, including, wow, with this phone call, maybe we can get him impeached over this. And so Vindman wrote up a memo and sent it to his buddy, Eric Ciaramella, over at CIA in order to pretend to be a whistleblower and claim that Trump was somehow breaking the law here when he was the goddamn president of the United States. And all he was saying in that interview was, man, I heard that Biden intervened in a corrupt way to get this prosecutor fired. I wonder if anybody's going to look into that. I think it'd be good if you looked into that. Well, guess what? Biden did do that, and in the most corrupt fashion to protect his son. And they lied about that 180 degrees and said, oh, no, you know what it really was? They really said this over and over again. They said this, that Biden was mad at the prosecutor because the prosecutor wouldn't prosecute his son's business, because he was so corrupt that Burisma was able to buy him off. And that's why Biden wanted rid of him, was to get a real straight shooter, untouchable type in there who would go ahead and indict the company, even though that's the exact opposite of what happened. And all the investigations were shut down and by the new guy, right? The ones that had been started and even restarted by the guy that he threw out of there. And then we know now too, that the FBI had been sitting on that laptop since November of 19. So they knew the whole time that in the Hunter Biden laptop are explicit instructions to him by the CEO of Burisma talking about, hey, what up on my political influence and you getting these investigations against me shut down, boy, like you promised. And Hunter saying, yes, sir, we're working on it. We're working with Sally Painter from Blue Star Strategies, and we're getting those phone calls from Washington made soon, we promise, right? And they bury that. Imagine that the FBI that put out 10,000 leaks against Donald Trump, they buried that. His own FBI. We're not talking about Obama's FBI here. We're talking about his own FBI buried that laptop and all the information while they were impeaching him for suggesting to the president of Ukraine, they're like, man, you might want to look into that completely and obviously massively corrupt thing on its face, you know? And it's just amazing that they did it. It's almost unbelievable. And I know I sound like a kook when I recount it, just because of how unbelievable it is, because of how over the line they went in trying to take on this guy, which is, you know, a big part of why he got elected the second time after 4 years out, is because people are just resentful against all the cheating. I couldn't vote for him because of the Zionism issue, but I almost did anyway when I heard in mid-October last year that Jack Smith had issued new charges against Trump in mid-October. And I almost was like, that's it, I'm voting for the guy. You know what I mean? I calmed down by that night. But it's that kind of cheating, that kind of dishonesty and all of this stuff, and compounded on top of them on it that way, the way that they did it. It's just intolerable.
I know you don't have an unlimited amount of time. Maybe I have two more questions if I could, if you have a little more time. back to the Trump thing and Russiagate, it seems as though he's still not past this. And it seems like he still has to fight that. Even when he met with Putin in Alaska, the thing that you heard was, look at how respectful Trump is to Putin. Look at how he's meeting him on the red carpet. Look at the rollout. Oh my God, this is embarrassing to the
Not
country.
red carpet.
but it seems like there is nothing Trump can do to ever get past being considered a Putin puppet, which is probably one of the reasons why there will be no end to the Ukraine war.
Yeah.
And it'll keep going because Trump doesn't want to be the president to end the conflict, make it look like Ukraine lost because of the concessions and they lost because Trump is so in bed with Putin. Does this make it almost impossible for Trump to actually end the Ukraine war? We just saw today, U.S. approves $825 million in new weapons. Trump's secondary sanctions against India, 25% secondary sanctions. What's going on here? Do you see Trump in a position that he could end the war, or is this going to be something that Ukraine sputters to the next general election, and then it's passed on, sort of like Afghanistan, how it keeps getting passed on?
Yeah. Well, I mean, on the first thing, Russiagate has clearly just permanently poisoned the minds of America's Democrats. They don't know that the Mueller report came up snake eyes. They don't know that this whole thing was a farce. I don't know if you follow Matt Taibbi very closely, but his podcast partner, Walter Kern, was on the Bill Maher show. And he goes, no, that was all bogus. And Bill Maher goes, no, and still believes in it. And as proof, shows a clip of a reporter asking Putin while he's standing right next to Trump, did you prefer Trump? And did you help him win? And he clearly is just answering the first question. The question's going through a translator and everything. And Matt Taibbi showed where that reporter himself even said later in an interview, he only answered yes to the first question, not the second. And Bill Maher tries to use this as a gotcha that, look, even Putin admitted that he rigged the election for Trump. And it's like, this is, Mr. Atheist, right? This is his religion instead, as he gets to believe this nonsense. And I think that counts for virtually all of the Democrats. So in other words, like Russia, in the minds of America's Democrats, as foolish as this is to us, and as far removed as this way of thinking, as far removed from this way of thinking as we might be, it's essentially like the communist menace in the minds of the American right if we went back to 50 years ago, that there's this insatiable imperialist power that can only be deterred with, ultimate force and the strongest determination by America to hold back their tide and this kind of thing, which I think was exaggerated then and is absolutely exaggerated beyond belief now. But in the minds of America's Democrats, I don't know how you ever turn this off. I mean, like, imagine for a minute, right, that you are an NPR lady, right, that you were driving home from work in 2017 and 18 and 19, consuming this every day on the radio, that Moscow had done like a Manchurian candidate. They had done a coup d'etat. They overthrew Hillary Clinton and her, usurped her rightful throne and foisted this racist, fascist, anti-everything, demagogue, whatever. Meanwhile, like, to you and me, it just sounds silly because, come on, Donald Trump. That's Donald Trump, dude. We all know him. He's not a fascist. He's Michael Jackson, dude. He's a can of Coca-Cola, dude. He's the Golden Arches, dude. He's the 1980s. He's not a Russian agent. Come on. So it seems so silly to us. We probably have trouble putting ourselves in their shoes and in their imagination. But imagine for a moment, seriously, as hard as you can, at least, like, stretch and try to imagine really believing all this stuff and then really being that afraid that, can you believe, oh my God, what's happened in this country, that we were able to be overthrown by this Russian and this Russian agent in this way? They were terrified, man. It's very hard to get them to come down from that. You know what I mean? It's something that they've invested so much in, and they invested so much of their belief in the FBI and the CIA and the special counsel to protect us from this virus, this infection, this guy who somehow won the election, but he shouldn't have because he cheated because the Russians helped him cheat and all these things. And like, it's very difficult for them to get over that. And that's going to be an issue with them for us to have to consider and weigh and dealing with the Democratic side forever, right? This is going to be like this, a permanent thing that's bad about them, right? And it's very unfortunate. It really is. And then but now as far as that affects Trump's ability to negotiate, I might be too biased about this. I look at these attacks against him for rolling out a red carpet as so absurd, right? Like, this is all they've got. This is their modern version of Russiagate, is that he met at a summit with the other major nuclear weapons power in the world and treated him with common decency and respect. Give me a break, dude. I mean, whatever their daydream was or their comic book was about how Donald Trump was supposed to get up there and like spit on the ground next to Putin's shoes and like give him a good elbow in the ribs and drag him in there and read him the riot act. That's not how any of this works. And they all know that. Imagine that was the memo they sent out. That was what they agreed on in their big Zoom team meeting. Ready, break. Let's go out there and accuse them for having a red carpet, everybody. Well, yeah. I mean, so I look at that as actually counterproductive for them. I think more and more just discredits the media as just a bunch of has-been nobodies, dude. They're just, who cares what Jake Tapper claims to report about anything or any of these clones of his peers up there. It's just those days are more and more over. They're not all the way over, but it's, what you and I are doing right now is picking up the slack of what was supposed to be their job. And more and more people are just tuning out of there. And when they see those kind of absurd attacks, I think it probably just strengthens Trump's position, quite frankly, rather than truly weakening him as it did back. If we went back 8 years ago, the same equivalent, I don't think it was true. I think that the media has really suffered, especially just in the last couple of years here, especially because of the way that they've treated him and reported on him, where people just don't believe them anymore for so many reasons. But then one more thing to answer you then would also be, but what can he do about the war over there? And this is where I am unfortunately very pessimistic, and I don't mind being wrong about things. We're talking about like, what do I think might happen? So I'm not like reporting facts to you. I'm just telling you like my assessment of where I think we are. So it's just my opinion. I can only be so wrong, it's a guess, right? I can only be so wrong. But I look at it like Trump just got inaugurated for his second term at the wrong time. Like, God dang, Joe Biden screwed this up so badly. And at the point where we are in the war, the Russians are winning, but they're winning slowly. And they haven't finished taking all the territory that they've claimed. Now, in recent days, they've announced, as we're recording this, the very end of August of 25 here, they have said officially, we had heard rumors of this, like passed on from Trump administration officials, I guess. We're now hearing this from the Russians, that they're willing to freeze the lines in Zaporozhye and Kherson where they are. So this is where they only control about 2/3 of each of those provinces that they have claimed sovereignty over 100% of. And they're saying, no, we could draw new lines, new borders for these oblasts, as long as they keep their so-called land bridge across the Azov coast from the Donbass to the Crimean Peninsula, and they can guarantee those freshwater resources from the Dnieper River to Crimea, then they're willing to settle for that. That's a huge climb down from their stated goals. On the other hand, they're still insisting that you want to end the war now. Well, the Ukrainians are going to have to turn around and walk away from and give up 100% of the land that they still control in the Donbass, which in Donetsk, which is approximately, I forgot, I think I read 3,000 kilometers. I don't know what that is in miles, but it's essentially like 1/4, maybe a little bit less, but I think it's approximately like 1/4 of Donetsk is still under Ukrainian control. And they are not going to, well, their individual men are going AWOL, that's for sure. But until they are forced to just absolutely break, their commanders are not ceding this territory other than slowly, as they are literally beaten back inch by inch by inch. And so that means we're just in a very difficult place for Trump to call timeout. Now, what's he doing with these, sending more weapons, putting these sanctions on India and all these things? Is he's trying to give himself some cards to play, right? And because he just doesn't have any. He can make promises to Putin about, I'll normalize relations with you. But if you were an advisor to the Kremlin, you would say, sir, you can't trust him. Chelsea Clinton could be the president 3 years from now. And then what are you going to do? God help us. I'll adopt whatever religion I need to pray to prevent that from happening. You understand what I mean? That like, it is not a sure thing that Trump could normalize relations with Russia and that it would stick, right? If he was going to do that. And see, this is where It's really just unfortunate. We just need good advisors behind him. I mean, put the Israel issue aside. On this issue, for him to be Trump the Great, he would really have to take control of the national government and let them know that, like, no, dude, I won the election. I get to decide this. And this is what we're doing. We're dropping all our sanctions. We are re-signing old dead treaties that we never should have torn up. And we are going to strike a deal with Moscow this week for American companies to develop resources in Siberia. And we're going to work together in the Arctic. And we're going to do this and this and this and this. Especially, we're going to work together on nuclear weapons issues. Okay. And we're just, regardless of the Ukraine war, we're going to do everything we can to normalize relations with Moscow now, because I said so. And that's what's most important to do. And if Congress doesn't like it, fine, impeach me again. I dare you. I'm doing this. And then that's what you do, right? Look, Richard Nixon sent Henry Kissinger and then followed him over there and shook hands with Mao Zedong, the most violent man who ever lived, the worst killer in all of human history. And 50 years ago, Richard Nixon said, no, it's better that we work with them. It's just business. And they always said, only Nixon can go to China, right? Because if a Democrat did it, Nixon would call him a commie, right? So you can't do that, but you can send Nixon. Okay, for the same reason Ronald Reagan could negotiate with Mikhail Gorbachev, and H.W. Bush could negotiate with Mikhail Gorbachev and bring us down from 70,000 H-bombs on missiles to approximately 14,000 between the two of us, right? It was a massive climb down, the end of the Cold War and all of that. And so for the same reason W. Bush, if he wasn't the worst person in the world, could have made peace everywhere he went and said, look at me, I'm big, tough, fake cowboy, macho guy. And I say it's okay to use diplomacy in this case instead of fighting. That would be the Ronald Reagan way to do, right? Is carry a big stick, but then make a deal. Don't attack, right? And so it's the same thing with Trump. If Trump gets up there and beats his chest and goes, I'm the greatest president since Abraham Lincoln, and the proof is I'm going to Tehran, I'm going to Moscow, I'm going to Beijing, and I'm going to Pyongyang. And we're going to work this out. And we're going to have the rest of this century, we're going to not have enemies. We don't need them. We don't need great power competition with Russia and China. We'll just come to a modus vivendi. He could do that. But he's got to have his priorities straight. And he's got to say, this is what I say the Republican Party is about now. Solving these problems, not perpetuating them so that some people can skim off the top on some weapon sales, right? It's the same kind of thing that he's attempting to do on a lot of other things where there are, even short-term and medium-term costs to, say, for example, on immigration. The more he cracks down on immigration, the more he angers big business. It's not just the Democrats that want those illegal immigrants. It's big business, because it's the inflation fighter, right? The more money they print, the more upward pressure on all prices there are, including wages. And so if you own a giant or run a giant corporation, your biggest headache is upward pressure on wages. That's your worst part of your overhead. That's your margin right there. So then what can you do to undermine that upward pressure on wages? You bring in a bunch of illegal immigrants, right? Well, these corporations are major constituencies of the Republican Party. And they surely, and we've seen already some exceptions carved out for some agricultural firms and some from hotels and some other things. You see where they're already balking and they're working to get some exceptions. But overall, like, he's probably angering them, but he's saying, no, I'm making this trade-off. I think it's better for the country to stem this flow of illegal immigration, even if it costs me some donors among some big corporations that rely on this labor, because it's a trade-off and I'm making it, right? Same thing with making peace. Yeah, the Democrats, who everybody knows are a bunch of homosexuals and feminists, they're going to call him a wimp. They're going to say that he's not tough enough. And no offense to gay people. I have gay friends and whatever. I'm not saying that. But like, the Democrats, they're the war party, and they're going to attack the Republicans for being a bunch of wimps. That's not going to stick. It's not going to stick. It's certainly not if you turned it around. Certainly not if you had, weak little old Barack Obama over there doing his apology tour and all of that. You know what I mean? That's how the right wing attacks the Democrat when he does it. But when a Republican does it, then it's like the greatest thing Richard Nixon ever did was split China away from Russia because he was so smart, right?
I have one final question for you, Scott, because I know you don't have, as I said, unlimited time here. The prevailing theory with Trump is that if he wanted to, if he actually wanted to, he can make one phone call, end the Ukraine war, and end the Gaza genocide.
Definitely the second one.
Just by one phone call. Well, that's what a lot of Trump's critics are saying. This is the power that he has.
Not in Ukraine, he doesn't.
You don't think he has that power in Ukraine because of Europe?
I would very much. I really wish I could see an argument for how he does. I'd try to pass word to him somehow.
Yeah.
Here's the trick to it, man. I don't see the trick to it.
So
the
Israel,
Russians don't want to call timeout right now. How's he going to make them call timeout? They want the rest of Donetsk, and Kiev won't give it up. So where are we?
Wouldn't he then force Kiev to have to give it up by saying no more weapons? That's it. No more intelligence. No more weapons. If you don't agree to Russia's terms, we're out. You'll have to deal with let Germany and the UK save you.
Yes. Okay, but see, you could see the difference right there in terms of the phone call. In this phone call, he's telling the side that we've been backing that's getting beaten by the larger power next door to give up, retreat, surrender. Whereas in the case of Israel-Palestine, America has written the blank check for the aggressor, who are killing all the innocent people and destroying and confiscating all of their property. And so it's a matter of him saying, I demand you stop. I won't supply the bombs for you anymore to commit these acts of aggression. That's much easier than, politically speaking, than essentially completing Biden's mission of screwing over the Ukrainians by getting them into this horrible mess and then leaving them high and dry. As you implied earlier in one of your questions, or intimated earlier in one of your questions, that's how we do this. Maybe it'll have to be the next president who leaves them high and dry, because these things get, kicked down the road. As W. Bush said about Iraq, well, that'll just be up to other presidents to figure out what's going to happen. Same thing with Biden on Ukraine. He knew there was a very real chance he was only going to do one term, and he started a massive war with a nuclear weapon state, a proxy war right on their border. It's the most irresponsible. He didn't exactly start it, but he kind of did. And he sure as hell did not do everything he could have to prevent it. And he left his successor in just a terrible position as far as that goes. Now, as far as Israel, like if you make the parallel, we're talking about, could Donald Trump get on the phone to Putin and demand he stop? No, because Putin's not reliant on the American war machine here, right? You see how it's the opposite on the parallel track here. It's not the same thing. When it comes to Israel, I urge people to look this up. I hope that they doubt me. You shouldn't believe things that I say. You should go and look this stuff up. You can find it right now online. You can read it in the book of Ronald Reagan's diaries. Ronald Reagan in 1982 got on the phone to Menachem Begin, who was a Likud party, right-wing nationalist prime minister of Israel, when he was bombing Beirut. And he says in his diary that he got on the phone to Begin and he demanded that he stop bombing Beirut.
And that's spelled, wait, Scott, you said for them to look it up. It's Begin. That's how you spell his last name.
Right. Yes, exactly.
So people might not know how to spell the last name.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. Yeah, for saying that. Yeah, it's spelled like begin. Right. And so, and Ronald Reagan says in his diary, and by the way, Begin confirms this story to Israeli media from his own side of the story. So this isn't like Reagan embellishing his memory in his diary or whatever. We know that this happened just the way he describes it. He told Ronald Reagan, not Walter Mondale, not Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan told Menachem Begin that what you're doing in Beirut is a Holocaust, and I demand that you stop. The symbol of this war is a 7-year-old child with its arms blown off. And Begin stopped in 15 minutes. And Reagan said, and this is not in his diary, I forget the source for this, but you can find this too. Reagan is reported to have said, I didn't know I could do that. That it was that easy. But yes, of course you can, Mr. President. You're the President of the United States of America. Israel is your toenail. You are the boss of it. 100% you are. If Ronald Reagan had said, I wish the Israelis would call for new elections because I don't like this Begin guy one bit, they would have had new elections by Friday. The same thing here. Donald Trump is the boss. If Netanyahu is in charge, it's because Donald Trump has ceded his authority away. He doesn't have to do anything. And he ought to take it personally. I don't know why he doesn't, that Netanyahu was perfectly happy to break the ceasefire, other than if that was the deal that they always had, that they wanted to have the ceasefire just around the time of Trump's inauguration to make him look good and give him a little credit, and then gave him a blank check to go ahead and restart the war at any time. Nobody even claims that it was the Palestinians who broke the ceasefire there. They were waiting for the second stage of talks, and Netanyahu just decided to start the war right back up again and lay a full food blockade and kick out the UN refugee agency that was passing out all the food to people. And Trump's just letting them go. And so, yeah, I mean, in other words, the point is it doesn't have to be this way. And if Trump would take a hint and take the insult that actually Netanyahu doesn't respect you, Mr. President, any more than he respects these Palestinians, or he respects the rest of us, who, again, he mocks the American public as absurd for supporting him, given what disdain he has for us. That's his word for it. And if Donald Trump would just see that, he could change this policy tomorrow. He could change this policy this afternoon. He could pick up the phone and do like Ronald Reagan and say, enough of this. But instead, you could see he's signed on to the plan of the full ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip. And they keep working. Americans are working on pressuring these countries in the third world to accept the Palestinians. Like, what do they really think they're going to do? They're going to move 2 million people to Indonesia, to Southern Sudan, or to Libya, or to Ethiopia, these war-torn countries, most of them not Indonesia, but the rest of them are. And they're just going to move 2 million Palestinians there? I mean, talk about infamy. Talk about violating Article 46 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Dude, you can't do that. You know, what are they? It's crazy what they're talking about. You know, just eradicating the people of Palestine. And then here's the bitter pill too, is that the Israelis don't even really care about the Gaza Strip. They like to steal it one day because, yeah, property values and whatever, but it's really about the West Bank. That Bible calls that Judea and Samaria, and that means that they're allowed to kill anyone and steal anyone's property who lives on what they say belongs to them. And so that's ultimately what they want, is to annex and ethnically cleanse the entire West Bank, where there's 3 million Palestinians there. And quite frankly, I hate to say this, and I sure ain't encouraging it or trying to normalize this view or nothing, man. It's be the world's worst outrage. But I think we are on the path right now where I would not be surprised if any day now Netanyahu started a massive air campaign against Ramallah and Jenin and all of the rest of the major cities in the West Bank in order to begin the same process that they've done in Gaza of just driving all of them. They'd probably try to drive them all towards Jordan, or like, I don't know, south into the Sinai or whatever it is, where they
blame it on terrorism, right? He would probably blame it on terrorism or something. That's like right. That.
And they'll go, yeah, remember how you hate and fear Muslims because all that propaganda we sold you about how all our enemies are your enemies and all of that? Well, this is just more like that. And like, I hate to say it, I don't want to sound all woke or whatever. I know this is the former trend or whatever. I don't mean it like that, but you have to admit there is some reality to this, that like the Israeli Jews are whiter. And Benjamin Netanyahu, you know, was educated in New York State. He speaks more or less American accented English. And the ruling caste of Israel are Ashkenazi European Jews. And so they get to put up this front that they are essentially like this, the easternmost outpost of the West, right? That they're this, as they've said before, this Fort Apache out there somehow holding back the barbarian tide or whatever. When in fact, they're this pseudo sort of kind of Western, at least European colony in the Middle East, where, like, quite frankly, I think they could, if they weren't backed by the United States, I think they probably would have made peace a long time ago and would have essentially a status quo modus, whatever vivendi thing, get along with the people in the region. They're not just beset by enemies like in the mythology. They got their fait accompli in the seizure of the state in 48, but it's the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza since then that has been, you know, driving the controversy, where you have, you know, 5 million people who live under total martial law, right? With no civil liberties or civil rights respected whatsoever. Imagine a foreign occupying army's law and then living under that for 50 years, right? I mean, for 2 generations plus in that way, and longer than that. It's, you know, and everything that America has done and every agreement that America has got Israel to sign on to, where they promised to back off and allow the Palestinians to have independence on their own little mini state there on the West Bank and Gaza. They've broken all those deals. And they always blame it on the terrorists, the terrorists, the terrorists, but they're the ones who break the deals. You can just go back and look through how they did it. And, they even admitted that, the biggest, most famous one is at Camp David in 2000, where they claimed that they gave Arafat the moon on a silver platter and he refused to accept it. But that was such a lie. They were offering him a tiny little cut up Bantustanian continued occupation. And like, he probably should have accepted it for what it was at the time compared to the result of not. But it was a deliberate kind of a sabotage where they were offering him an offer that they knew he couldn't accept. And then Bill Clinton promised him, I won't blame you. I know the Israelis are screwing you and they keep moving the goalposts and changing the deal and whatever. So I promise you, Arafat, I won't blame you. And he goes out and gives a press conference and goes, oh, it's all Arafat's fault, which is just totally not true. And if you look at, in fact, even the Israeli negotiator there at Camp David later admitted that that was the case. Ben Ami, I'm sorry, I forget his first name. His last name is Ben Ami. And he gave this interview on Democracy Now!, where he explained that, we were the ones who screwed them and made it look like they were the rejectionists and the whole thing. And so, it's the kind of thing where I think anyone can recognize that if it was one of our enemy states and they were backing a foreign country that was doing this anywhere in the world, this would be our pretext for intervention against them. Right? If the Iranians had a colony in Baluchistan in Pakistan where they, oppressed the locals and whatever, something that you could compare somehow to this kind of thing. This would be what we would use against them on a daily basis. That look at the absolute inhumanity of the Iranians treating the Pakistani Baluchs in this way, or whatever. If, Myanmar got into it with Pango Pango or however it works, we wouldn't tolerate it if it wasn't our guys doing it. And it is unfortunate. And I really think it's just the death knell of the MAGA movement. I mean, it's going to trudge along, but you just can't have it both ways here, right? It's right when, he ran on all of his promises about on tariffs, on immigration, and on war. It was really war, because that's the one. I mean, hell, all three of those, quite frankly, but I believe war would be at the top of the list of the things that really got him elected. That people are just sick and tired of, even if it's not all concern for the humanity of the poor victims on the other side of the world, it's all that money. They raise us to believe in government school that war is good for the economy. But man, when you're sitting at a red light and you can see dudes living under the bridge, and the guy on the radio says they just sent another $164 billion overseas to help the Israelis kill Palestinians with, it makes just regular folks think, you know what, the Palestinians can get killed on Israel's own dime. Like, why do I have to participate in this? And we know that literally is the money they take out of our checks. That literally is the money that they inflate and destroy our currency in order to transfer our wealth over to these other countries and to commit these most heinous acts, right? It's not like it's all earthquake relief, right? This is just the utmost cruelty going on in the world. And I think people are just sick and tired of it. And so I think there's got to come a day, and maybe it won't come. I don't know why it would, other than maybe Netanyahu just steps on Donald Trump's toe too hard, one too many times, and he takes it personally in a way or something. But America very much needs a day when the president gets sick and tired of being told what to do by the Israelis. And the thing is, like we were talking about before, the public is way ahead of the state on this, especially on the left, but more and more on the right as well. And so there's, as they're saying about the snapback sanctions against Iran this week, there's a snapback coming, right? I mean, we don't have the power. There's nothing like a limited republic in this country, right? We know that. At the same time, the government can't just be so congruent to the public's wishes on such an obvious thing for so long. Or like, for example, you will get an immigration restrictionist like Donald Trump. The American people wanted one for a very long time. Well, they finally voted for one. You know what I mean? It's the same thing with the wars. Like, this is, it ain't perfect at all. But James Madison's Constitution does allow for the people to have their way if we truly insist, right? If we really build our consensus that we want it like this or we don't want it like that anymore. And And so I think there is hell to pay, right? It's coming. And Dave Smith has a theory that the Israelis are just going to crack down now. They're going to do everything they can now because they know they've burned their bridge with the American public. They know that after the baby boomers die, that Generation X leadership, and especially the millennials coming after us, we're just not going to tolerate Israel pushing us into all these wars and telling us all these lies, all this time, and picking our pockets in this way. Their time is running out. They already know it. So maybe that's why they're being so cruel now. They're just trying to get away with absolutely as much as they can on the shortest time frame. And then I don't know what they're going to do. Maybe they'll cozy up to Russia, but I say good luck with them, Vlad.
Yeah, you mentioned before, like even anything that Trump puts in place with Ukraine, the next president could overturn, but you could then make the same case with what Trump allows Israel to do in the West Bank and in Gaza. Technically, right? The next president
Except that he's consistent with the status quo on Israel-Palestine. The fact that he wants to end the war in Ukraine at all makes him the aberration, right? But the status quo on Israel-Palestine is exactly what he's doing.
Yeah.
I mean, he's Joe Biden on Palestine right now. And so if the Democrats pick up from him, they'll pick up right where he left off, still doing whatever the Likud says.
Well, Scott Horton, thank you for joining the Trends Journal today before Labor Day weekend. Everyone, I would suggest you Googling and following Scott Horton on social media. Scott, we'll put some links below the story when we post it. Scott, thank you so much for sharing your insight with the Trends Journal. We appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me.